Hey there, Ruth Haven Grounds family. Today I'm going to say something that might sound like gardening heresy. Traditional composting is overrated. Now, before you click away in disgust, hear me out. I've been turning compost piles for years, monitoring temperatures, maintaining green to brown ratios, and doing all the things we're told make us good gardeners. But the more time I spend observing natural ecosystems, the more I realize we've overcomplicated something nature does effortlessly every single day. Let me take you on a journey that might just change how you think about building soil fertility forever. Walk into any healthy forest and you'll notice something remarkable. There's no one out there with a pitchfork turning piles of leaves. There's no compost bay with careful layering of nitrogen and carbon sources. Yet, somehow, the soil in these forests is absolutely incredible. Rich, dark, alive with organisms, and endlessly fertile. What's happening on that forest floor is nature's original composting system, and it's far more sophisticated than anything we create in our backyard bins. Leaves fall, branches drop, animals leave their droppings, and everything stays exactly where it lands. The decomposition happens in place, in layers, with countless organisms working at different speeds on different materials. This is called sheet composting, or more accurately, the natural soil building process. And here's the kicker. It requires zero work from us. No turning, no monitoring moisture levels, no worrying about whether your pile is hot enough to kill weed seeds. Nature doesn't care about any of that, and yet it produces the most magnificent soil you've ever seen. Let's be honest about what traditional composting actually demands from us. First, there's the physical labor. If you're doing it properly, you're turning that pile every few weeks, which is back-breaking work. You're hauling materials from one part of your garden to a designated compost area, then eventually hauling the finished product back to where you need it. That's a lot of unnecessary movement of organic matter. Then there's the time investment. Good compost takes months to mature, sometimes up to a year. During that time, those valuable nutrients are locked up in your pile instead of feeding your soil and plants. You're essentially creating a nutrient holding pattern when your garden could be benefiting right now. And let's talk about what you're actually losing. Every time you turn that pile, you're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You're disrupting the fungal networks that are trying to establish themselves. You're creating heat, which sounds good, but that heat is literally nutrients being burned away as energy. The hot composting process that we've been taught to strive for is actually a nutrient loss system. Here's where things get exciting. There's a technique that's been gaining traction among permaculturists and regenerative gardeners called chop and drop, and it's essentially working with nature's system instead of against it. The concept is beautifully simple. Whatever organic matter you have, whether it's prunings from your shrubs, pulled weeds, before they seed, or fall leaves, you simply chop it up a bit and drop it right where you want it to decompose. The material becomes a mulch layer that slowly breaks down, feeding the soil life directly beneath it. I started experimenting with this method 3 years ago in my vegetable beds, and honestly, the results have been transformative. After harvesting crops, instead of pulling plants and composting them elsewhere, I chop them at the base and leave all that organic matter right in the bed. I add layers of leaves, grass clippings, or, any other organic material I have available. By the time I'm ready to plant the next crop, that top layer has begun decomposing and the soil underneath is teeming with life. The beauty of chop and drop is that it mimics exactly what happens in nature. Nothing is moved, nothing is turned, and the decomposition happens gradually in layers. This slow, cool breakdown actually preserves more nutrients than hot composting. The fungi can establish their networks undisturbed, the bacteria can do their work without constant disruption, and you get to save your back and your time. Nature takes the chop and drop concept even further with living systems. In a natural ecosystem, plants aren't growing in isolation. They're part of a dynamic community where some plants actually work to mine nutrients from deep in the subsoil and make them available to their neighbors. These are called dynamic accumulators, and incorporating them into your garden is like having a self-renewing fertility system. Plants like comfrey, for instance, send roots deep into the soil to access minerals that shallow-rooted vegetables can't reach. You can chop the comfrey leaves several times during the growing season and drop them right around your crops. As they decompose, they release those deep-mined nutrients exactly where your vegetables need them. I've planted comfrey at the edges of my raised beds, and throughout the growing season, I harvest leaves and layer them around my tomatoes, peppers, and squash. It's like having a compost pile that grows itself, and the nutrients go directly from plant to plant without me playing middleman. Other dynamic accumulators include yarrow, borage, nettles, and dandelions. Yes, those dandelions you've been cursing are actually working to break up compacted soil and accumulate minerals. Instead of yanking them out and composting them elsewhere, cut them and drop them right where they grew. Let them give back what they've gathered. Here's something that really changed my perspective. Traditional composting creates a relatively uniform end product. Everything gets mixed together, breaks down, and you end up with what looks and acts pretty much the same throughout the pile. But nature doesn't work that way. In a natural system, you have incredible diversity of materials at different stages of decomposition. Fresh leaves sit on top of partially decomposed matter, which sits on top of well-aged organic material, which gradually transitions into humus. This stratification creates niches for different organisms at every level. Some organisms love fresh material, others prefer well-aged matter. By maintaining these diverse layers, you're supporting a much more complex and resilient soil food web. When you chop and drop, or simply leave organic matter where it falls, you're preserving this natural diversity. Your soil becomes home to a wider array of organisms, from the bacteria and fungi that start the decomposition process, to the protozoa and nematodes that feed on them, to the arthropods and earthworms that process larger particles. This complexity is what creates truly healthy, resilient soil. If the idea of leaving organic matter on the surface makes you nervous, maybe you're worried about pests or, how it looks, you can actually take nature's approach underground with a technique called trench composting, or sometimes folks call it dig and drop composting. This method is incredibly simple. You just dig a trench or a hole in your garden bed, fill it with kitchen scraps or garden waste, and then cover it right back up with soil. The material decomposes directly in your growing area, and the nutrients never leave the site, and which is pretty neat. I like to do this between planting rows or in areas where, I won't be planting for a few weeks. The decomposition happens more slowly than in a hot compost pile, but honestly, that's actually a benefit. The nutrients are released gradually over time, so your plants get a steady food source rather than just a one-time boost. Plus, the anaerobic breakdown that takes place below ground helps preserve nutrients that might otherwise be lost to the atmosphere in aerobic composting. The biggest lesson I've learned from moving away from traditional composting is, really, the power of observation. Instead of following rigid rules about carbon to nitrogen ratios and turning schedules, I spend more time just watching what nature does and then supporting those processes. I've noticed that in areas where I simply allow leaves to accumulate and break down naturally, I get incredible volunteer seedlings the following spring. Nature's way of telling me the soil is ready. I've also observed that the areas where I practice chop and drop have far more earthworm activity than my former compost-amended beds. And, I've seen that my soil structure has improved dramatically without any digging or turning on my part. This observation-based approach has honestly made gardening more enjoyable and a whole lot less labor-intensive. I'm working with nature as a partner, instead of trying to control and manage every process. And really, the results speak for themselves. My plants are healthier, my soil is richer, and I have more time to actually enjoy my garden instead of, just maintaining compost piles. If you're ready to embrace nature's superior composting systems, I'd say start small. Pick one bed or one area of your garden and just commit to leaving organic matter where it falls for an entire growing season. Chop up your prunings and drop them as mulch. Let your fall leaves stay right where they land. Add kitchen scraps directly to your beds using the trench method. Then just watch what happens. Observe how quickly the materials break down. Notice which plants really thrive, and pay attention to the soil life you start seeing, the earthworms, beetles, and honestly, countless other organisms that show up when you stop disrupting their habitat. You might still want to keep a traditional compost pile for materials you don't want in your beds. Things like weeds that have gone to seed, diseased plant material, or, stuff like that. But for everything else, consider letting nature do what it does best. Composting in place, building soil right where it's needed, and creating those diverse, layered, living systems that produce the most incredible growing environments on Earth. If this perspective has opened your eyes to a different way of building soil fertility, I'd really love to hear about your experiences. Subscribe to Ruth Haven Grounds for more insights into working with nature rather than against it. And, hey, share this article with fellow gardeners who might be ready to throw away their pitchforks and embrace nature's effortless abundance. Let's build better soil together, the way nature intended.